actions that are in my brain, in my mind, that we could actually come to a point where we both would agree on something. That's absurdity in a world full of chaos and unguided chances. Makes no sense at all. But if logic is actually something we can attain, we can actually aim towards and capture, that becomes very scary. Because from the atheist, they've got to explain that. From us, we can just say, glory to the Logos. This is Jesus Christ. This is he who created all things. Time and space is not where Jesus exists. He came into time and space, don't get me wrong, but he left it. God is in the metaphysical. God is not in time and space. He's not in the material world. He can be a part of the material world because it's lesser than him. He can occupy a part in the material world as he did, but he's beyond it. He's outside of it. We are not. We need a true miracle to happen. C.S. Lewis put it, this isn't like teaching a fish how to breathe oxygen. This is like creating a fish and turning it into a dog. We need a full transformation to get into that metaphysical world. And it's only done by the Creator who created us. It's only done through salvation. And this is what the cosmological argument basically states. It doesn't fully answer, does God exist? But what it does say is there's more to this world than the physical. There are things outside of time and space that we know are just as real as the table that it occupies. In fact, that table could not be there without mathematics. It could not hold the weight it does without physics. It could not be used for the utility it is without logic. That table is fully dependent on all of these transcendent things. But it's in the material world. It's in the time and space. So, what does the Bible have to say about something like this? We're claiming God is in the transcendent realm. Even though he can occupy the time and space, he's beyond it. He's metaphysical. Exodus 3, when Moses asks God about, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I say to them? And God says to Moses, I am who I am. He said, say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. What does I am mean? It means I'm present. It means I'm here. It means I exist. It starts to kind of sound like it's not temporal. It's not I was and I will be for a long time. I am. I've always been. I always will be, I am, I'm consistent. It says, I am transcendent, I am infinite, and I am self-evident. Coincidentally, this is exactly what we see in those metaphysical, those things outside the circle of time and space. Transcendent, we already described that. They're outside of the material world, therefore they are transcendent. They're metaphysical, meta meaning beyond the physical. They're infinite, we already discussed that. 1 + 1 had to equal 2 before the Big Bang. Because we know the Big Bang relied on that law of mathematics. We know it relied on laws of physics. These things are constant. They're self-evident. That's exactly what a constant is. It is. I am. It is. And it's logical. It makes sense. Without it, we have absolute chaos. There is no up, there is no down. Gravity pulls, gravity pushes. We breathe air, we don't breathe air, things work sometimes. Sometimes the molecules are in order and they work. Sometimes they're still in the same order, but they don't work. That's illogical. The universe contains time and space, but it is built from mathematics, laws of physics, constants, and logic. The universe is built by a transcendent cause greater than itself. This is what the cosmological argument says. Still does not get us to Jesus Christ, but we'll get there. Right now, though, it does tell us transcendence is an argument for God's existence. So again, transcendent, infinite, and self-evident. Does that sound like the God of the Bible? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He was the greater cause in the universe, and that's how the universe became. He wasn't lesser than it. This is why when you get arguments at times against God and they want to know about him being eternal, well, if everything has a cause, Where was God's cause? Again, if God had a cause, he could not be eternal. We'd have to go look for another something that we would then call that something God. So God at this level is not specifically, again, we're Christians, so we do believe it's Yahweh, we do believe it's Jesus Christ, the God of the Old Testament, New Testament. But in the argument, this is not specifically saying who God is yet, but it is saying the concept of God. So if you give me a God that was created, then I gotta go look for a different one. I gotta find one that's never been created. It's gotta be beyond that. Amen? I will pause at the end of these briefly for a quick question if there's anything to recap that I was not clear about, but I know we do have to go on and we have to have time for questions, and we've got 4 more of these to get through, and I think we're gonna try to get through them. So I'll ask quickly, is there any quick question of any sort? Or feel free to write them down and we'll go into them in detail later. We good? All right, let's move on. Design, argument number 2. We're gonna argue that the universe is intelligent. Again, we've kind of already touched on that with the logic and the reason and things. But more importantly, what intelligent design deals with is not so much that there's intelligence in the universe, but that we can know that there's intelligence in the universe. And we'll explain that. This is called the teleological. So teleos, which means the intelligence. So it's basically the vision of seeing something and recognizing it. This is also where we get like telescope from, right? Telescope isn't just a magnification of something, it's something that you will know and recognize. And these are the 2 big arguments of intelligent design. For it to be considered an intelligent design, it must have a recognizable appearance, what we call an appearance of a recognizable form. It's not something you identify and understand. It's of no use to you. What's the point? Lastly, it has to have purpose in its function. If we have no idea what it does, it's really not useful to us. Now, there are things we don't have any idea what they do, but we can recognize their form and say, but there was some purpose, even though I don't know what it is. That's a big difference, and we're going to look at that. So to do that, I want to introduce you to the Gorilla Rock. Now, this is off the coast of Costa Rica, and if you sail around this enormous boulder in the ocean, and you catch it at the right angle, this kind of looks like a gorilla, doesn't it? But would I call this intelligently designed? I mean, I could make the argument that this is done by evolution, by erosion. Really, it would be more erosion than evolution, but I could say that this is from years and years of waves crashing against it, of maybe ships bouncing off of it, whatever it may be. But while I understand this looks like a gorilla, if I approach this from another angle, I might not see that it's a gorilla. I might see something completely different. So we recognize this. It is recognizable. Couldn't tell you what the function would be, and it really doesn't seem like there would be any purpose for the function. But it is a design, a recognizable form, I'd say, but is this intelligent design? Well, Stonehenge is actually, the rock shapes in them aren't even as complex as gorilla. I don't see any creatures in them, but what I do see is patterns. I start seeing things when I look at Stonehenge, and this is in England, and I start saying, well, there seems to be symmetry, there seems to be shape to them, and I have no idea what they were doing here, but there seems to be too many things in this for it to just be coincidental or unpurposeful. I'm starting to recognize in Stonehenge that there's a reason for the way these stones are placed, and that reason had a function. I still don't know what it is, and archaeologists have been trying to figure it out for years, and they come up with different, it was Druid worship, it was meant, but the point I'm making is we're starting to get close to intelligent design. And look how basic of a form that is. It's stones on top of each other. And any atheist would adamantly deny that this happened by wind currents. This happened by a flood, that water rushed up on the hill and just placed these rocks on top of each other. They know it. We don't know who did it. There's no signature on these rocks. There's no instruction manual to tell us what they were for. But it's intelligently designed enough that we look at that and say, yeah, this was humans. This took something greater than it to do it. We don't say that about Gorilla Rock, but we're sure that this was intelligent. Have you ever seen these guys on Easter Island? There's hundreds of these lined up on Easter Island. We have no idea what the reason is for. But they're carved, or chiseled, I should say. They represent human faces. How do I know that? Because it's an appearance of a recognizable form. I know what a human looks like. They're facing in a line, spaced apart in the same direction. Maybe they were to scare off would-be pirates. That as they sailed up to the ocean, they would go, or as they sailed up to the shores, they would say, oh my gosh, they have an enormous army. We need to go on to another island. Maybe that was it. That's some of the suggestions. Maybe it was worship of a sun god. Maybe it was, we don't know. We have no idea why these things are on Easter Island. We do not look at these and say, yeah, they're just pointless though. You know what? I think this was done by years of erosion, years of water. If you give these rocks 7 million years with the right amount of wind, oh yeah, I can see how they would all carve into these shapes. Makes complete sense. I mean, that's the biggest argument we have from the evolution side is it takes time. Tell you what, I will give you 95 billion years. Do you think this would honestly ever happen? And I don't think anybody who's a skeptic would be honest enough to admit that they believe that that would happen in 95 million years. I think you can see where I'm going with this. So Carl Sagan, famous atheist, astronomer, the man known for his statement that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This is an atheist mantra. You'll hear this constantly. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Well, this quote gives us a little bit into Carl Sagan's thinking as what extraordinary evidence could be. So Carl Sagan said it's easy to create an interstellar radio message which can be recognized, emanating unambiguously from intelligent beings. What he's saying is basically a sound out in space. To be intelligent, that sound would be a modulated signal. Beep, 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 of prime numbers, so maybe not quite what I said, but anyway, that could only have a biological origin. So if we found a sound in space that increased with beeps, that would be extraordinary enough for Carl Sagan to believe that there was intelligence behind it. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. My extraordinary claim is that we were intelligently designed by a creator. Well, you have to provide me extraordinary evidence. All right, my day job, I'm a programmer. Actually, I now manage programmers, but I still roll up my sleeves and do enough to know what I'm talking about. Well, Bill Gates comes from the same world that I do. And he said DNA, which is something in all of us, is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. Well, I would challenge him and I'd say, okay, for something to be like that, in a computer program, this is what I deal with. We have what's called design practices. They're best practices. And they're object-oriented, meaning things should be a certain way. And not only should they be a certain way, they should be clustered into groups that function the same. Kind of like maybe a foot with toes for balance. I think we all have feet with toes, so that seems to be a best practice, and it's object-oriented. Hands with fingers and opposable thumbs to grip and grab. Those seem like other best practices. Eyes, I mean, I could go on with the entirety of the human body, and you get the point. Exception handling. What exceptions are is when someone enters a phone number and they try to enter A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, a good computer program is going to say, that's not a phone number. You need numbers to be a phone number. So they'll catch that, and then they'll throw you an error, and they'll say, sorry, but phone numbers have numbers. You're not entering numbers, you're entering letters. You need to do something about that. DNA catches errors, and it fixes them. Lastly, it should have an objective, a design objective. Well, DNA is actually literally coded instruction of 3.5 billion letters. It has so much of an objective that science is actually seriously moving forward with the potentiality, because we know it's there, we just haven't quite figured out exactly how to do it, where we can alter our genes by changing the organization of these letters in DNA so that you can have a child with blue eyes and blonde hair. You can have a child that's 6'2" and 240-pound frame or whatever. You can actually custom order your child as you go through the drive-through and get your child to be the way that it should be, because we know DNA has that potential. How can DNA have that potential if it's just completely random? DNA is more than beep, 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 beep. DNA is, hey, listen to me, I'm out here and I have something to say, and I have intelligence and I want to speak it to you and I want to explain to you something. That's what DNA is screaming in the universe. And Carl Sagan was more than happy to have just beep, beep, beep. But he's so fixated on the universe looking for a sign, he never saw the sign within us. And that's what DNA tells us, is that we actually have an intelligent design because we literally have been coded with intelligence. And there are books out there that will go through, and you don't even have to read a Christian book necessarily. You can just pick up a textbook that are used in universities that explain the mechanics and the function of DNA, and you'll see that it has all of these: design patterns, exception handling, and objectives. DNA is screaming that we are intelligently created. So is the Bible. Psalm 139 states, "For you formed me, you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together." Get that picture. This isn't just slamming some clay together. This is knitted. My mom and my daughter spend a lot of time crocheting and knitting. It's intricate. It's focused. It's more than just chance. It's intelligently designed. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. Amen. David was such a wordsmith. He understood it. He didn't know what DNA was, I'll give you that. They didn't understand that back then, but he knew there was something to me. I was not just random chemicals shaken up and thrown together. I was purposefully created in a recognizable form. I'm sorry, but that's intelligence. And it's not just intelligence, it's extraordinary evidence of intelligence. It fits what Carl Sagan demanded. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but you're still going to get arguments against it. Nope. It's all because over billions and billions of years, things worked out that way where we just kept trial and error and we found ourselves in this. It doesn't work that way. I have a computer program that I could show you right now that if I just left it to its own devices, it's not going to have any improvements. I've got to go in there tomorrow and actually make fixes to it. It's not going to fix itself. And I guarantee you, if I sit there and come back in 95 billion years, it still will not have fixed itself. Things don't happen that way. It's foolishness. It's insanity, and I don't mean to be offensive, but this is where the Bible is correct, and where he calls those who do not fear the Lord fools. Because you literally have to reduce your mind beyond simple common sense comprehension of things to fight to try to remove God from the equation. And I would tell my son Chandler, who was with me, he was 18 at the time when I filmed the movie, My Week in Atheism. And I think he specifically said to me one time, like, are you scared going up against all these atheists? And some of them, very smart guys and PhDs and professors. And I said, you know what, Chandler? I said, the truth is, I don't have to be as smart as them. I really don't. Because I don't have to jump through all the hoops they have to jump through to remove God out of the equation. I can talk common sense, and it makes sense. You have to jump through a lot more hoops and be really, really smart to make foolishness make sense. Truth is truth, and it's self-evident, and I will hold to that. And I'm not trying to be arrogant, I'm not trying to be cocky, I'm not trying to be prideful. Look, we have a God, and he's knowable. And so far, we're seeing that there is something transcendent out there, and there's intelligence behind it. It's more than just beeps. There's something out there. Now, we got to move on. Sorry. Okay. Knowledge. Now, this ontological argument is a very complex argument because it's very philosophical, and I'm going to, I don't want to move quickly through it, but I do want to just kind of deal with it on a basic level, and there's much more you could read about this. But basically, this is a very bold statement. There's never been a people group, tribe, or civilization that has not recognized a divine supernatural entity. Now, I stand by this statement. I'm making a statement. This is me. I stand by this. And I've had atheists come to me and say, oh, that's not true. Specifically, this one guy was perfect timing because I had just read a book about this same exact tribe, and he told me about this tribe that is an atheistic tribe. And I said, that's not true at all. Oh, it absolutely is. Father such and such went and visited them, and after realizing they were atheists, he actually became an atheist. And I said, did you read Father such and such's book about this tribe? Because chapter 1 in his journal, he states how they would wake him up at night screaming when there were thunderstorms, and they would all run to the shore because of the man in the sky that wanted to punish them. But that's not a God. They just had to attribute the thunder and lightning to a being in the sky that was trying to punish them. But that's not a God. Do you see why I don't have to be as smart to reason that away? I think that's literally the definition almost every religion would have of a God, to some extent. They were not an atheistic tribe. They rejected Christianity, yes. They rejected any other religious beliefs, absolutely. But they believed in something in the sky when it thundered and lightning that was going to punish them. And they actually believed it was a man. You take from that what you will. If you think that's an atheistic tribe, then okay, I'm not going to argue. But my point being is still anthropology, all the studies we've done of humans that we have in record. I don't care what people want to say about the length of humans on the earth or so on and so forth, but all we have of written record of humans only goes back to at the most 6, 7, 8,000 years. And we have no evidence, not one shred of evidence of any group of people that have ever existed at any capacity, in any number, anywhere in the earth, that did not recognize a divine supernatural entity. This is ultimately the goal of the ontological argument. God exists because we know it. It's embedded in us just like our DNA. Now, what the ontological argument will say, Anselm of Canterbury, he was a Christian theologian around 1000 AD, and he wrote this large book called Proslogium, which is for God, for the Logos, right? For logic. And he said God is the greatest conceivable being. This is kind of what I alluded to earlier. He said, anything you can imagine. If you can imagine something better than that, greater than that, more powerful than that, more knowing, that's God. And whatever that is, if you can find something even more powerful, more knowing, more great, then that's God. And whatever that is, and you can keep going until you run out of it and you say, okay, I thought of the greatest, most possible thing. And he said, well then, if that exists in your mind, then it must exist in reality. It's not possible it could not exist in reality. How is that possible? Because again, I am less than what caused me. If I could be greater than what caused me, then I caused it. So the greatest I can come up with in my mind means there's something beyond that. Does that make sense? Like I said, this is a very heady thing and it gets crazy, but this is the best way I think I can explain it and make it easy. Is what we call the visible light spectrum, which sits on what's called the electromagnetic scale. And the easy way I explain this is we only know what we know, right? We can't know anything else. Evidence of that, I know what blue is, I know what yellow is, I know what green is, I know what red is. But that's not all the colors. In fact, some of you may not see those same colors I see. Some of you may have color blindness, and you can't see certain colors. So I may say blue, and it's actually gray to you, or it's green even. But you wouldn't know how to describe blue to me. You would look at a red apple, and I said, that apple's red, and you may see it gray, and you may say, what's red? Well, I can't even describe to you what red is, but I can point to red things. She's got a red hoodie on, he's got a red, that's a darker red, I can start getting into nuances, right? I only know what I know. I can't actually explain what red looks like. How do I explain what a color looks like? Well, better yet, why don't you explain to me what the color of X-rays are? Or the colors of gamma rays or ultraviolet rays? Look, we know these exist. We can't identify them, but we know they're real. We know on the long wave, infrared waves, microwaves, radio waves, we know they exist. These things have colors. These things exist in the universe. When we see all these striking pictures from Hubble telescope and they show us these constellations, these great things, those are colored. The pictures come back black and white, and NASA assigns colors to them. Most of those, we have no idea what the colors are. But we assign to them red and blue and yellow and white. We know their actual colors because of the chemical readings that come back. They're somewhere on the spectrum, we can't see it. Because we can't see it, it doesn't mean they're not there. We can only know what we know. So if the best I can describe God is within this visible thing, it's got to be real. How else could I describe God? God exists because my mind conceives of God. It's really that simple. Well, what about the unicorn? I've literally had this asked to me so many times. Unicorns don't exist, do they? Nope, you got me there. Unicorns don't exist. However, kind of looks like a horse to me. I know horses exist. Kind of looks like a horse with a horn, kind of like maybe a rhino. What am I doing with a unicorn? I'm taking things I know and I'm packaging it up into something. So yes, leprechauns don't exist, but there are men much, much shorter than me that do exist. And they're even Irish. And they like the color green, and some of them might be rich with a lot of gold, I don't know, or they might be angry, or they might... You're telling me leprechauns don't exist? Of course they exist. They're in our mind. Yeah, but they don't literally exist. What about what I just described as not literally existing? We know God exists because the ontological argument tells us we have knowledge of him in our mind, and it's not possible for us to conceive of something greater than ourselves unless it's there, it's real. So the Bible tells us this in Romans 1. Paul says specifically, now listen to these words, because Paul's not going light on non-believers with this. According to Paul, the ontological argument settles it. Keep all your other arguments. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. We'll get into that in a minute. The ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. What are they suppressing? There is no God. You know there's God. Stop acting like that, Paul would say. You absolutely know there's God. And they would say, I do not. Don't tell me that. I'm an atheist. I'm without belief. Paul would say, no, you're not. You know as well as I do that God exists. You're running from him because what can be known about God is plain, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, the cosmological argument tells you God's there. And it's been clearly perceived. The intelligent design gives you the ability to understand it is there. God is there ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. Proof enough right here, according to Paul. Cosmological argument and intelligent design should tell you enough to know, knock it off. You're being foolish. You're trying to rationalize things away, and you know inside of you, because the ontological argument says inside of you is the footprint, the thumbprint, the mark of the Creator. And he has put it inside of you, this innate knowledge that he exists. And you're going to spend your life fighting it. And God says, as a result, the wrath of God will be revealed. But the interesting thing is, it's not because of their unbelief necessarily. It's because of their ungodliness and unrighteousness. Which leads us to our next argument for God. And this is morality, the argument of objective morality. How can Paul say ungodliness and unrighteousness to people who don't believe in God? Because fight it as much as you will, there's a moral standard that we all know exists. And that's why I have a scale there. Because when we talk about objective morality, we're not talking about weighing items on a scale. This is what, very often when I do have these conversations with atheists, this is where they go. We want to put on one side love, kindness, gentleness, respect. And on the other side, we want to put murder and rape and thievery and all these bad things. And then we want to weigh them. And so an atheist wants to say, so you're going to tell me that God commanding to kill the Canaanites, especially the children, that's moral? You're going to tell me that God killing the firstborn of all those in Egypt, that's moral? I'll let Chandler deal with that next week. He's dealing with the problem of evil. I got the easy one. My point to that is, look, we don't even need to have that conversation. Because objective morality isn't about what's worse than what. It's about the fact that we're going to sit here and believe that there even exists a scale. There shouldn't even be a scale in the first place. How can you dare to say to me, in a universe of chaos, of unguided chemicals just bouncing into each other and creating shape and form and time and space, that anywhere in there belongs whether baby kittens should be kissed or killed? That makes no sense to me. And in fact, we'll dig a little bit deeper into that specific type of thought. But so basically, morality, or specifically objective morality, deals with two things: justice and judgment. Justice, many people believe when I say the word justice that I'm talking about punitive punishment. That's not justice. Justice is the quality of being fair and reasonable. A judge's job is not to put people in jail. A judge's job is to be fair and reasonable. If you did something bad and you deserve to go to jail, that's justice. If your car runs into my house and busts through my wall and we go to court and the judge commands you or judges for you to pay the $100,000 fix, you're going to be upset. You've been punished for that. I'm going to be very happy. Justice has been upheld. Justice is not just about punishment. We have this negative connotation of justice that it's always about, you're going to get what's yours. Well, yeah, but sometimes yours is very good. So is there justice in a holy God punishing people, deeming them to hell? Just as much justice as there is in a holy God forgiving a repentant sinner who belongs in hell, but they have grace and mercy, and they get to be with him because they've accepted him as their judge. They're not trying to do it on their own. Now, that's a whole other thing again. Chandler can deal more with that. But the point being is justice is not a negative. It's a fair and reasonable treatment. And judgment is basically the execution of that justice. It's the evaluation of evidence to make a decision. Now, when we look at morality, we have to consider those two things, justice and judgment. This is where we talk about subjective or objective, or really subjective versus objective. So the argument for God is not that there is morality, it's that there is objective morality. Now, subjective means it's never absolute. So, if we have subjective morality in the universe, then the question would be, was slavery wrong in 1840 before we abolished it in the United States? Because, I mean, it was a societal thing. It was part of our laws, right? I mean, society wanted, or a large portion of society wanted slavery. So if we had it as part of our laws, I mean, it must not have been immoral to own a slave, right? I mean, society deems our morality. Well, what happens then in 1870 when slavery is abolished? Well, now it's bad, yes. Why? Well, because we've said it's bad now. Okay, the problem with that is it's subjective. It will change over time. Slavery was not abolished because some people decided to determine that this was bad treatment. Slavery was abolished because we said there's a transcendent target that we're trying to reach. And we can hit that target, but we have to agree that what we're doing is wrong and we need to do something right. You can't have that with subjective thoughts. It's up to society, it's up to you. That means subjective reality is never absolute, but morality, not reality, but objective morality is to be attained. That's what they did with slavery. They aimed at something beyond our laws. They aimed at something beyond mankind and said, that's the target we're aiming for. It exists out there, beyond the physical. It's in the metaphysical. That's what we need to attain towards. So slavery must be abolished. Why? Well, if you read the beginning of our Declaration of Independence, it explains it to you. That there are these laws natural, they sit over mankind and thereby God. And they're self-evident, that all men are treated equal. That's what they aim towards, an objective law. It was beyond what men could come up with. So, what defines morality? An atheist would say, well, society. Yeah, but the problem is society is based on relative conditions, which is what I just said. If with society, then in 1840, I was not immoral for, obviously I didn't live, so understand I do that a lot. I throw myself into the thing. But in 1840, I was not immoral for owning slaves. But in 1870, I was. That makes no sense to me. Empathy. Oh, okay. This is another popular one. Empathy creates morality. Well, empathy changes based on moral determination. So if I say man A killed man B, is that bad? Well, yeah, I have empathy for man B. He shouldn't have killed him. Whoa, hold on. Man B broke into man A's house and was coming at him with a knife. Oh, well, now my empathy switched. I'm with man A now. I feel bad for man A. Yeah, that was wrong. Whoa, hold on a second. 2 nights prior, man A raped man B's wife. Now do you see where empathy gets you? I have no idea who to judge. Yeah. Morality can't be based on empathy. Empathy changes. Well, evolution determines it. How does evolution determine it? Utility is what usually is the answer. Utility is not a moral thing at all. The lion kills the gazelle out of utility. It must eat. We don't judge him for that. We judge humans for shooting deer, even though they're going to eat them. Let's not even talk about the babies in the womb that were more protective over the deer than the babies. But these utility, what are we talking about? If utility is what determines evolution, do we see anything wrong with what's going on in Denmark, where they actually do tests on preborn children to figure out if they have the Down syndrome's gene, and if they do, they will abort them because of the bearing that is on their society? And I don't want to get into a political discussion, but in a socialist society that we're all dependent on each other, these people are nothing but a burden, right? I mean, I'll give you another one too, to be honest. And hey, my mom's 83, but kind of once you hit 80, what are you really doing good for society? I think we ought to, off them too, right? I mean, isn't this essentially what Nazi Germany was trying to achieve? Isn't this, euthanasia, utility? You're going to tell me that those are moral decisions? Utility is very scary. Utility does not create morality. Utility is survival of the fittest. You can't judge anyone for their behavior at that point with utility, because I'm doing what I do. Period. I'm stronger than you and I kill you. Period. Don't judge me. Yeah, those fail. So the question isn't what defines morality. What we really have to then look at is, before I do that, got a little ahead of myself. Evolution basically can teach us that it is better to be alive than dead, but it cannot teach us who should remain alive and who dead. And that's what we were just talking about. Evolution can tell us that it is good to breathe and it is good to do things, but it can't say who of us should be breathing. That takes something else. So it doesn't become a what defines morality. Again, like these arguments, we have to define a who. It's more than just a what. Dostoevsky has a very large novel out called The Brothers Karamazov. And in that he states, if God does not exist, then everything is permitted. Actually, his character, I think it's Victor, makes that statement, but the statement is very true for what its purpose is that if there is no who, if it is what, if it is utility, then all is permissible. This is exactly what Paul said, right? We're judging them ungodliness and unrighteousness. How can you judge them according to that, Paul? They don't believe in God. Because we know there is such a thing as wrong. There is such a thing as right. Sometimes we have a hard time figuring it out, but we don't remove the scale. So again, objective morality is not addressing the items on the scale. It's not addressing what is wrong and what is right. It's addressing the fact that we know there is such a thing as right and there is such a thing as wrong. And anyone who disagrees with that, have something personal taken away from you. And the greater it is, the greater you'll know it, like your mother, your child. This is why one of the main things I hear about atheists that turn away, or people that turn away from God to atheism, so often it has to do with, again, next week's talk on the problem of evil. I find majority of the time, I'll say, because it's not all the time, majority of the time, long enough in the conversation, if there was a God, he wouldn't have allowed my mother to die. He wouldn't allow my daughter to die. This girl was 2 years old. She suffered from cancer for 24 months and died excruciating pain. What kind of God exists that would allow that? This is the objective morality they're dealing with. In a world of utility, in a world of just random chaotic happenings, there's no room for that judgment. It is what it is. And without God, everything is permissible. It doesn't mean that we should be doing all these things. It just means, who are you to tell someone they're wrong? You're no one to tell anyone you're wrong. You're just a shaken up bottle of soda. You have no right to tell another bottle of soda they're any better or less than you. That's what objective morality deals with. So Psalm tells us, but the Lord sits enthroned forever. He has established his throne for justice, and he judges the world with righteousness. He judges the peoples with uprightness. We can rest assured that because there is objective morality, not only does it prove to there being a God, but we know that he is just. We know that he is good. And he went out of his way to show it to us with the law, with Christ fulfilling the law. He set up a standard that he himself had to keep in order to prove to us that he can be trusted. This is what faith is. The root of the word faith is trust. And that's what it's built around. So let's take to the last one, and wow, we're taking quite a while, so sorry, I keep looking at the time, but experience, the argument for personal experience. Now, again, I said in the beginning, I think this is the most compelling and truthful one because it affects you the most personally. So I've got you at this point believing, okay, so causation, the cosmological argument, all things come from a cause, nothing comes about on its own. Whatever came about has to be by something greater. I got that. Intelligent design, so this cause, me, okay, I'm intelligently designed. My things work the way they do. I can chew bubblegum and walk at the same time, and I can listen to music and whatever, right? We're intelligent. I got you. And we know God because I can think of God. Okay, sounds crazy, but some of it made a little bit of sense, so I'll go with you on that one too. And then morality. So now we know that there's no way for us to know right or wrong unless there is right and wrong. All that's good head knowledge. But once you've experienced the power of God in your own life, and to some of you that's the breaking of addiction, you've never been addicted to anything. To some of you, that is a transforming experience that you were going down the wrong path. You were stealing and breaking things and doing all kinds of crime. And your mindset, everything was changed and you were freed from that. I've never had an experience like that. To some of you, we can go through all these different personal experiences. So what is personal experience? Well, first of all, the greater the calamity, the greater the sin, those are usually the people you find that respond the most with that personal experience. But it's also the still small voice. It's also the peace and comfort that you have in life. The presence of mind, of just awareness of God, and not just the joy, but the contentment that gives, the security that gives, that no matter what's coming against me financially, relationships, who's going to be the next president, whatever it might be, God's in control. I'm at peace. I have that because I've experienced him. Now, experience is an interesting thing because this gets mocked, and this will be hugely mocked by the scientific community. And I put it in quotes because the scientific community is not as non-believing as we're led to believe it is. But in the atheist world, experience, it's a four-letter word. Experience, what does that mean? Because I feel God. Ooh, we get goosebumps, and so God's real. That proves absolutely nothing. Excuse me. The scientific method is based on experience. You cannot study anything without experiencing it. In fact, that's the premise of how science does its work. We go out, we do something. I dropped this. It fell. I just experienced that. That was an experience. I'm going to drop it again, and it falls. I'll keep doing that. The moment it doesn't fall, that one experience changes everything. And now I have to refigure out. It's all based on experience. That's exactly why we call them experiments. Science is based on experience. When I've experienced enough things, when I've done enough experiments, I can consider myself an expert. I'm an experienced expert now. It's kind of a redundancy to say that. I'm an experienced master now. You can call me an expert. This is exactly what science is based on. So what makes a relationship then? Experience is some form of interaction we have with the world, whether it's a science experiment of a thing dropping and learning gravity to confirm it, or it's with one another. I don't have a relationship with this, but I have something different with people in this room, people out there in the world. That's more than just a bunch of experiments. We have trust, we have an intimate connection, we have an emotional bonding, we have forgiveness. So much easier for me to forgive my child and my wife or my mother or my brother or someone I love dearly to for hurting my feelings, for doing something wrong against me. But if one of you cut me off in the parking lot on a Sunday afternoon, come on. Now we're going back to justice and judgment. Right? Forgiveness comes so much easier when you have those experiences, when you have that relationship. But how valid can a personal experience truly be? Because we experienced something, we felt it, does that make it real? Well, have you ever had a headache? I can guarantee you if you go get a CAT scan while you have a headache, you're not going to see the results of that showing up on your CAT scan. Have you ever been in love? Again, I have a marriage certificate. That's all I need to prove I'm in love, right? That means I'm in love. I mean, once you have a marriage certificate, you don't fall out of love. We obviously know I'm being sarcastic with that. So, how valid can experiences be? I think these two really express it enough. Experiences is how you personally know God exists. Now, the beautiful thing behind that is when you add all five of these together, I can't teach you necessarily about experience. You're going to have that for yourself. But what I can do is I can say these five arguments paint a beautiful picture. The cause is a proof of a transcendent entity. There's something beyond physical. There's something beyond just what's in front of us, this universe. We can also see that that transcendent entity is very intelligent. It has a purpose. It's not just abstract. It's not just chaotic. It's not just random. And that it's knowable. Now it starts getting a little scary. Because I can admit there's transcendence. Many deists do, people who believe in a God. And I can even admit it's intelligent, because Thomas Jefferson would even admit that part. But Thomas Jefferson started backing away from 3 and 4, and he started cutting out the things in his Bible that he didn't think Jesus really said. And I know many Christians who do the same thing, because we get uncomfortable with certain things that are in the Bible. But now, this transcendent, intelligent entity is actually knowable. Well, now right away, when something is knowable, that means there's a relationship involved. In any relationship, there's judgment involved. Morality is proof that this transcendent, intelligent, knowable being is judgmental. Again, that doesn't mean punishment. It means fair, equitable treatment. It has a standard of right and wrong. And he's personal. Now, if you go out there and you look for all these gods, find one that's transcendent, check. Intelligent, check. Knowable, check. Judgmental, check. Personal. I don't know. I mean, Buddha is not a personal God. I think the closest we could come to, well, outside of Judaism, because we're really dealing with the same God, just fulfillment of the story, closest we could come to would be Allah, Islam, the Muslim religion. Is he personal? Well, by those standards I said of intimate, here's the problem. No Muslim can tell you they have security of heaven. If you ask a Muslim, will you go to heaven? They will say, praise be to Allah, it's in his hands, I hope. I hope at the end I've done well enough. Unfortunately, I'll get that from some Christians too. They think it's judgment based on their works. If I do good enough, I can get to heaven. That's not what Christianity teaches. So what Christianity teaches is all five of these. It's the only religion that teaches all five of these. All the others do fall short on number five, which is, again, one of the reasons why I think it is the most important, because God was not satisfied with these four. He had to condescend himself to human form, give up his glory, to not only be one of us, but to be rejected, abused, brutalized by us, so that he could reach us, so that he could pull us to him. It's a beautiful picture. It's the most personal experience you have in any religion. There's no other religion that matches that. If you look at even in the Greek gods, they have disdain for humanity. Oh, we are the biggest annoyance to them. And if they could just get rid of us, and there's this constant struggle with the Greek gods trying to get rid of us. The Roman gods are no different. It's just the Greeks, they traded in their togas for shields and swords. It's the same gods, and they disdain humanity. Christianity, it's all about that. Okay, so I'm done with that. We went longer, but we do want to open it up for question and answer. And then if we don't have questions to answer, we did want to split up into groups and do a kind of a small group discussion about these points and how they are relevant or can be relevant, applied to what you're going through right now. Because I know many of us have this. I get calls, and I just, this last week, got a message from a lady who's a Christian whose daughter's gone off to college and she no longer believes. You know, this stuff is real. And it's not she doesn't believe because her parents divorced and didn't live a Christian life and didn't take her to church. And no, they're what you would call a pictured Christian family. But she went to college and these questions were never addressed. And Professor poked holes. Professors said, these things happen by evolution. These things happen by science. And science has disproven Christianity. And science has disproven. And she didn't have the answers for these. I'm not saying that had she had the answers, had she sat in this class, she wouldn't have walked away. We don't know where she really is anyway. And we're praying that she will come back. I've gone through my periods of doubts. Everybody, I think, goes through some level. But this is why, you know, I'm so happy we're doing these, because we need to have these conversations. So, any comments, questions? Yes?
Can you just, like under class, you have cosmological argument, I understand that, but what do you mean by teleological? Can you define that?
The word teleological?
Yeah.
So, it's the Greek word teleos. So, it means basically recognizable design. So it's more than just seeing something, which is why I said it's where we get the word telescope from, but we think of a telescope as it's just something we look through and can see something else. Teleos is actually more than just seeing it, it's recognizing it. So again, that's why to that argument, it's really based on being able to recognize a form and understand that there's purpose behind it. That's how we judge something to be intelligent. It's recognizable and purposeful. May not know what the purpose is, but we know it has a purpose, like Stonehenge. We know that just didn't happen randomly. Somebody purposefully put those rocks there. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Any other? Yes?
In the first argument, of course, the cosmological argument, right? You give us this example that you told us that God is the one who created all things. You also covered the point where if anybody asks you, how do you know that there was no other thing
Before God.
that created God? Because know that God is outside of time, space, and matter. So why can't that thing also be outside of time, space, and matter that could have created God? Why can there not be?
So can there be another thing bigger than God?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where it kind of goes back to when I said Anselm's was the greatest conceivable. So if, and I'll say if your God, I'm not really speaking specifically to you, but if your God is not the greatest, biggest thing, and there can be something bigger than it, then stop looking at that God and go with this God. Does that make sense? This is where, I know it gets in the mind, it's like that doesn't make, but the idea behind it is that if we know there are constants, if we know that 1 + 1 = 2, and it always has, the foundation of our existence is built on that. It could not, 1 + 1 could not have ever equaled 3. It had to be there, right? We know that that's an eternal something. What is it? My claim is that is God. Technically, I would say that is the mind of God. That is evidence that there is something eternal out there that had to exist always. It's eternal. It never could have started at a point. Because if it started at a point, that means at some point 1 + 1 = 3, which is complete nonsense, and it would never work. Does that make sense? So when someone says to me, like, multiverses, that's the explanation for our universe coming into cause, right? Multiverses. Okay, all you did was bounce it back. My God is still bigger than those multiverses. If you don't know, a multiverse is the universes that existed before this universe. They spawned off and you haven't defeated God. All you've done is put another universe in there that God controls over. Does that make sense? So the idea behind the transcendence, and this is very important to try to understand, is 1 + 1 = 2 has always been a truth. It never could have not been, otherwise we couldn't have anything. That is evidence that there is something eternal that everything proceeds out of. Now again, the cosmological argument on its own, that alone, cannot point you to Jesus Christ. But it can point you to there is something eternal that did not have a cause. What is it? I don't know. Let's have a discussion and figure it out. And then I'll point you to Jesus. But for now, I'm good with that. And I try to take this in steps with atheists at times. You know, when we have these discussions, I'll say, I'm completely comfortable with this conversation just being on that. If we can come to an agreement where you agree that there is transcendence of some form, that there is some eternal knowledge, existence, something, we've got something there. Things didn't just start at the Big Bang. You know what I mean? Does that make a look? And when we say God, a lot of times we do get a picture of Yahweh with a beard in the sky and he's touching Michael's finger or reaching out to him. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an abstract something in the universe that has always been eternal. Well, how can you believe that? Well, if you can explain to me where 1 + 1 began, then I'll give up that idea. So I don't know what it is yet, but I know it's something eternal. Make sense? Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
Could you please explain to me, I got this question, what's the difference between logos and lemma?
Rama. Oh, okay, that's a good, interesting one.
John, can you repeat the question?
What is the difference between logos and rama? Rama being the word that God breathes into existence. Rama, I'll have to say in my understanding of it, because I don't want to sound like I'm definitive on this, but in my understanding is Rama would be the function of the logos, the manifestation of the logos. So this is why we actually can say in the beginning God created, or in the beginning was the Word. That word, I think, if John said rhema, I think word would be a better term. Because word is the manifestation of thought, right? We can't, and this is where it gets real tricky, because you can't have a thought without any words. You must have words to form a thought. But words are absolutely meaningless unless they have a thought. Where does that exist? Talk about eternity. Talk about something eternal, right? These concepts, they're crazy head concepts, but again, this is where God exists in. So rhema, if you think of logos as the thought, and this isn't really a good explanation, but I think it's going to be the best to kind of try to keep it simple. I would say I would put logos more in the category of thought and rhema being more the category of word. Thought exists in me. That thought has existed forever before I even took control of it, but I haven't ever expressed it. Once I express it, I breathed out all scriptures. God breathed. That breathing out of it, that doesn't mean that when it was written down, it became truth. No, it was truth before it was written down. But it became expressed when it was written down. It became rhema. Does that make sense? And that's kind of where you kind of get the difference between, in a lot of theological categories, they'll kind of express Jesus as more of the logos and the Holy Spirit as more of the rhema, because it's kind of more the manifestation of the word. But again, if we say Jesus is the thought and the rhema is the word, well, now you're stuck in that, well, which is first? They're one and the same. You can't have a thought without words, but you could never have a word without a thought. Talk about eternity. Talk about something eternal. You know, I mean, these are good thoughts to have. This is the deep philosophical stuff. You know, again, okay, maybe we're not running a tenth of a mile tonight. Maybe we're trying for the whole mile. I'm sorry if you feel like we're going there, but take a breath, drink some Gatorade, digest some of this. We don't have to gather all this at once. You've got the slides. There can be many conversations. I do have some additional resources. I'm always going to put on a recommended reading, Mere Christianity, because I think it's one of the greatest Christian books ever written. It wasn't really a book. These were actually lectures or speeches that C.S. Lewis gave on the radio during World War II, and it turned into a book. But it's a fundamental understanding of Christianity, and it deals with some of these concepts we've talked about. There's also a book called Talking with Your Kids About God, 30 Conversations Every Christian Parent Must Have by Natasha Crane. I know her. She's somewhat of a friend of mine, associate of mine, I guess I'd say. I think this book is excellent, not just for parents to talk to their kids, but really for anyone to read, because it really breaks a lot of these things we've talked about down to a very basic level for children. There's also a book called God's Crime Scene. A closed case detective examines the evidence for a divinely created universe. J. Warner Wallace, he used to be a forensic detective. He's been on Dateline, NBC and stuff, like for their, you know, the husband, it's always the husband, kills the wife, and blah, blah, blah. Well, he's one of the guys that would solve some of these cases and stuff. He was an atheist, and he became saved, and he applied in his becoming saved. He did take an intellectual journey, and a lot of it was applying his investigative studies to Christianity, which led him to Christ. And this book deals with it in that type of way, you know, how they look for fingerprints and how God's fingerprints on everything, things like that. True Reason, Confronting the Irrationality of New Atheism. There's a little more of an aggressive kind of attack to atheism, but I think it's good, and I take that position with them. You know, I try to be gentle with respect to a point. I wish Peter put that in there, said, be gentle with respect to a point. No, but I am very respectful, but I am very direct. And it's amazing if you say things out of love and respect, what you can get away with saying. People will take some sour vinegar when you wrap it in honey. And then Understanding Intelligent Design is a very good basic book on understanding intelligent design, but it's not basic. It deals with it in a basic level, but it's very deep. It's very good. And it's by William Dembski and Sean McDowell. If you know Josh McDowell, the author of Evidence that Demands a Verdict, it's his son, Sean. So these are good reading books that kind of cover all these topics. Is there anything else? Yes?
I just wanted to add, when you spoke about the last one, about experience, and I also think there's something about faith, because a lot of times I have conversations, a lot of times at work, I work in construction, so it's kind of interesting.
Can you guys hear Chanel? Okay.
There's a lot of times where you're on your own and these conversations come up. Once people know you're Christian,
Right.
they have questions, they want to know why and how come. And I've had this conversation where it's like, well, you're a smart person. How can you believe? And my thing is like, everybody that we're talking to doesn't always, like Chandler said to you, Dad, aren't you afraid because you're talking to these guys with degrees and all these things, and they have tools at their hands to investigate. But on a day-to-day basis, a lot of us are just talking to average Joe.
Yeah.
We don't have access to those things. So
Yep.
Because if we believe, okay, if somebody found an artifact 10,000 years ago, they found the artifact, and maybe they showed it to a certain group of people who actually saw the artifact. But then at some point in time, you know, there's a story that travels on.
Mhm.
If you lose that artifact, if you don't have it, there's a story that travels on. If you're reading something in a magazine that says this happened, and you choose to put your faith or your stock in that, it's still faith. So
Mhm.
they've based or built or compiled their set of rules and ways they live their life to a certain extent on a certain level
Of
of
faith, absolutely.
of information that they've been given from wherever it came from, whether it be their parents or the news or what they read, and they didn't actually themselves touch,
Right.
feel, or experience
Yeah.
it. So I use that as my defense to say, okay, so if we can at least have that commonality, that there's some things that you haven't seen that you believe in or you haven't touched.
Right.
Then now I want to get into the fact that I have experienced
Yep.
this. So I can now have that conversation with them. And so I just wanted to point that out to say that sometimes the very fact of faith is
Pointing that out to the,
way
yeah.
to be able to.
There's a great book by a guy called Frank Turek, who's a Christian apologist, and it's called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And that's the exact point that he's dealing with it, is it takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a Christian, because atheism is built on just as much faith beliefs as we claim Christianity is. Now, the one thing I will say to that, though, is the one thing I always try to do with people is to get them to understand what faith is, and this mostly goes with atheists. Faith is not, and I hear atheists say it this way all the time, faith is the belief in something you know is not true. Whoever defined faith that way. Faith is the belief in something you know to not be true, but you really want it to be true. That's absolutely not what faith is. Faith is trusted experiences that you may not know what's in the future, but based on that trusted level of experience, you have trust of what will be in the future. That's what faith is. Abraham was the father of faith because God said to him, Abraham, you will have children as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sands on the earth. And it's going to come through your wife, Sarah. And she's going to have a baby boy, and he will be the beginning of it. And Abraham went, you think so? And Sarah laughed at the idea. But it happened. And through series of events in Abraham's life, God proved himself to him. Now when Abraham, and I just had this conversation this week, now when Abraham is told, I want you to go sacrifice Isaac, Abraham takes Isaac and he says two things. First, to his servants, you guys stay here, the boy and I will go up on the hill and then we'll come back. That doesn't sound like someone's going to kill his son. And then as they're walking up the hill, and Isaac says, Dad, where's the offering? Abraham goes, oh, that's you, kid. No. He says, the Lord will provide. Now keep that in mind with, is it Hebrews 6? Where the author explicitly says, Abraham did not believe it for a minute that he would be sacrificing Isaac. Abraham knew that whether it was he'd kill him and the boy would be resurrected, God would stop it. Abraham walked up that mountain going, okay, God, what are you up to? Because I know you. I know you keep your promise. You told me these things, they've happened. There's no sense, it makes no sense now that you would break your promise to me. That's not you. You don't do that. That's why Abraham was the father of the faith. Not because he was willing to stab Isaac and kill him, but because he knew that Isaac was not dying. Whatever happens, God is not breaking his promise to me. That's faith. And he only got that because God proved trust to Abraham. That's what faith is. Faith is trust. We gain that. You deal with electricity all the time. You have no idea when you're about to touch something whether you're going to die or not, other than your personal experiences over time, which have built trust in man-made things, which are crazy for that, but go ahead. But you have faith in these things because they work. They prove themselves. That's what faith is. Faith is trust. God has given us proof to believe him. So now when he says, do this, and you go, wait, that's never been in the playbook before, but I can trust you. I'll be honest. I'll be candid. I'll be completely transparent right now because this conversation comes up with me all the time. How can God punish people in a burning hell for eternity for not believing him? I don't have the answer to that. I don't know. I've heard a lot of answers. I've read a lot of answers. I don't know. There's some school of thought that think that hell is actually just an extinguishing, a permanent destruction, an end of existence. I don't know. Maybe. I know the Bible talks a lot about an eternal weeping and gnashing of teeth and burning. And how can God do that? I have no idea. But I know God enough to know that he's loving and he's just. And whatever he does is going to be loving and just. And while I can't understand it right now, as Paul puts it, we're looking through a glass dimly, someday I will understand it. And that's okay for me because I'm not saved because I'm trying to avoid hell. I'm saved because I want to be with God. And I'll give this last point because I always find this so profound, but it was in a philosophy of religion class, and I was talking with a student, and this was actually with the class. And she was a Christian, and some things she had said, whatever, led me to this question to her, which I said, if you woke up tomorrow and you knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, however you knew absolutely there was no God, would you be sad there was no God, or would you be relieved there was no hell? And she stopped for a second and she said, I would be relieved there was no hell. And I said, and I think that's where your problem is. In all seriousness, if we're just looking to get out of this, to get away from hell, I won't question anyone's salvation, but I would say, are we really saved? We go to Christ because we can't go anywhere else. Not because we're running from something, right? I don't know how I got there from faith, but I'm going to stop at that. So, because I have a tendency to do these things. So I'm sorry. That went so long.